At issue tonight, new legislation to fight against foreign meddling.
A bill which would give Canada new, modern tools to combat foreign interference.
One tool, a foreign agent registry, but likely not in time for the next election. So what's to be made of this new legislation, and will it actually make a difference? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down on At Issue tonight. Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see you all, as usual. Chantal, let's start with you. What do you make of the legislative response to, I think, not only some of the stuff that we saw out of the inquiry, but also to some of the demands that we've seen over the past 12 months?
If you were away for a year, you would have thought we have changed government. Last year at this time, we were all into David Johnston, there's nothing to see here, let's move on, report, and the government going along with it. And this week, it was really interesting to hear Minister Leblanc say that foreign interference had become the greatest threat to our democracy. That certainly didn't happen over the past 12 months. So presumably, the government has suddenly come around to the reality that it needs to address this. I think the legislation is helpful, goes some way to kind of fend off foreign interference. But I also think that the parties, and I mean all parties, are remarkably silent on their own rules for nomination meetings and leadership campaigns. And if I were looking to kind of create a cell within any of the three main parties, I would probably start at the local level by packing nomination meetings. And none of them seem to be interested in talking about that, starting with the Liberals, who have been found to have issues that pertain to foreign influence at the nomination level.
Yeah, and that was part of Justice Ugg's report last Friday, and may indeed be part of her recommendations by the time we get there. But I agree that there doesn't seem to be an opening from the Liberal Party to discuss changing those nomination rules, which are a little bit broader than what everybody else has. Andrew?
Yeah, I'll come back to that, but yeah, sure. She sounds like she's going to recommend something on that, and it'll be interesting to see how the parties respond. But to take up Chantal's point, you know, they're nailing down each of their points of vulnerability. They've been doing this in immigration, on housing, on decriminalization of drugs. And it does sound at times like somebody else was in, not just that there's a new government, but that somebody else was in power over these last little while. So yeah, the thing that was absolutely not something they wanted to talk about until today is now something they want to put up in the shop window. The measures themselves look sound enough. The only beef people are going to have is what took you so long. Other countries have done this long ago. Experts and opposition parties have been calling this for some years in Canada, and now we finally got a foreign agent registry promised not in time for the next election, so the next election will be held under the same old, so to be investigated perhaps some years after that. But to come back to the thing on the party nominations, absolutely. That's one of the clearest things in the preliminary report is this is a mess. This is an open invitation to, I mean, it's long been a scandal. It's been a scandal for decades, but it's usually been a domestic scandal of stacking meetings and all kinds of untoward things going on in both in nomination races and in leadership races. But it goes to another level when essentially you've opened a portal for foreign malign actors to get in and mess around in our politics. So it will be interesting to see what Justice Ugg recommends, and it will be really interesting whether any of the parties are willing to take it up, because the reason they do it is because they want to use these meetings and these races as membership drives, and nobody really wants to turn over the stone and find out what's underneath.
Yeah, I think the other point the Liberal Party would make, certainly, is that they are trying to open up democracy to as many people as possible. But that seems to have left them vulnerable, as Justice Ugg found in the case of Han Dong's writing, at any rate.
Is there anybody, whether they're adults or not, whether they're citizens or not, whether they're members of the party or not, you can take a good thing too far.
Yeah, I'm just going to tell you what they're, that's only telling you what their point is. Yes, Chantal, yes.
No, wait a minute. I've been watching these nomination meetings since 1984. And there's nothing democratic about stacking a room.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Okay.
Whether you're doing it because you're for the anti-abortion movement or for climate change, pick your choices. The easiest way to distort democracy is at the local level by stacking a room. It's not democratic to do that. Jean Chrétien gave himself the power to appoint candidates, because that was happening. We're talking about 1988, 1980. How many years is that? So no, let's not go for a democratic process.
But I'm saying that what their argument would be is the changes that came in when Justin Trudeau was there was to try and attract more people of different backgrounds into the process. That's what that's what their line would be. We don't have to believe it.
Sorry for having covered these. They didn't need to do any of this. We're all open to have people of different backgrounds.
Althia.
Well, I think it depends what you mean by stacking, because for some people, stacking a room is just inviting a bunch of your neighbors. Stacking a room is usually meant because you don't like who showed up in the room.
With a bus?
I think, with a bus. I think there is a difference between... I think there's a difference between allowing, like, foreign students who are on a visa to come vote in a nomination race, and possibly asking, 14-year-olds who are Canadian citizens to vote in a nomination race, or even permanent residents, because I don't know how the government can say we're going to ban permanent residents from voting in a nomination race, but we allow them to serve in the Canadian forces. Like, that doesn't make sense to me either. But anyways, to go back to the actual content of the legislation, I think it's important to remember that it's not just Justice Ugg's interim report and the final report that will come late in the fall of this year. But it's also the government actually knows the content of two other reports, NSICOP and NSIRA, who were, under the David Johnston regime. They were tasked to go look at all the intelligence. These are like top secret cleared MPs, and look at the review and make their own determination. So the government has had those reports since March. It is sitting on them and has yet to make them public, but it knows what the recommendations are. And in the case of NSICOP, two Conservatives sit on there, and the recommendations were unanimous. So there may be other political impetus that we're not aware of. The criticisms that I've heard about this legislation, frankly, it was just that it was not ambitious enough, and that a lot of the changes that are being made, one of them deals with a 1951 law that wasn't updated, are long overdue. I'm less worried about the registry not coming into force, because frankly, the registry, whether or not it's enforced for the next election, wouldn't stop the kind of meddling that is alleged to have happened in some ridings across this country. If anybody wants to do something covertly, they wouldn't sign up to a registry. The registry might have helped, the scientists at the Winnipeg lab, for example, but it's not going to prevent foreign interference from happening. But I think, the greatest takeaway from this is, frankly, that there is not that much opposition, because you didn't hear any of the opposition parties kick up a storm. So the government obviously got a balance right, and probably is protecting itself from stuff that will be made public in the weeks and months ahead.
But the fact remains, and this goes to your earlier point, Chantal, that many people will look at this and say, well, what the heck took you so long? Especially because I had been told the legislation was ready back in January.
Well, the foreign registry was promised in 2022.
Yes, but the legislation was also ready to go and didn't come. Yeah, Chantal.
You could ask whatever took you so long about everything in this file, including last year at this time when we were talking about how the government was saying it didn't need a public inquiry, all was sound. I put it down to, I guess, your choice is negligence or incompetence. I guess a mix of both.
Yeah. Last word to you, Andrew, on that.
Well, just to address Althia's point about, the malign actors aren't going to register with the Foreign Agent Registry. The point is that you've got another way of getting them. If they're found to be acting and they haven't registered, then you've got a way of nailing them without having to get into all the other things. It's a bit like nailing Al Capone for tax evasion. It just gives you another route to get at them.
Okay,
but some of the criticisms were like the Weibo chat messages. Like, I don't know that you can really go into China and say, oh, you should have registered, like that wouldn't have applied.
Yeah.
At issue, the corporate lobby. Pierre Poilievre has come down hard on lobbyists.
My experience with the corporate lobbyists in Ottawa, the main groups there, have been that they have been utterly useless.
But dozens of executives and lobbyists have attended high-end fundraising events headlined by Poilievre. So what's to be made of Poilievre's message to corporations? Does it stand against his record of meeting with lobbyists at fundraisers? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. I know everyone has lots to say about this. Andrew, you wrote about it, so you get to start. What do you make of the message that he's sending, and then his actions and how his actions line up with that?
Well, I wish lobbyists were totally useless. In my experience, in my observation, all too often they're fully earning their pay. That government policies are all too often framed to make life easier for business rather than forcing them to work for a living. So if there was somebody who came along and said, you know what, we're going to get government out of bed with business and business out of bed with government. We're not going to be providing any more subsidies or special favors to businesses, so fire your lobbyists because we're not going to listen to them. All of that would be great. But that's not what he said. If you actually, listen to his speech or read the piece he wrote for the National Post, he doesn't say I'm going to stop meeting with lobbyists. He doesn't say I'm going to stop giving handouts to business. He doesn't say I'm going to rein in lobbying with any new regulations. And he doesn't say to business, stop playing politics, stop cozying up to parties. He basically says, enlist on my side. First of all, he's saying, I'm not going to bring you any policies unless you first of all make them popular with the public. So I'm not going to take any risks or get out in front or lead. Mm-hmm. And secondly, he says, if I do bring in any policies you like, I expect, quote unquote, I expect you to get out and sell them for me. So basically, he's conscripting business as marketing agents for conservative policies. That is not quite the tough love, separation of business and state message that I think some people were taking at. It's just simply switching, from business cozying up to the liberals to cozying up to the conservatives.
Though the fact that he's calling them useless and has previously said, I would never spend any time with anyone on Bay Street, and then, we find out he's done 3 or 4 fundraisers on Bay Street. I mean, there is some obvious hypocrisy there that I think would confuse Canadians a little bit in terms of what he's actually trying to defend, Althia.
Well, I think, part of what he's saying there, and Andrew is right on all the points that he made, is he's also trying to muddy the waters, because one of probably the strongest attacks against Mr. Poilievre thus far has been the relationship that he has with his senior advisor, Jenny Burns, who has a lobbying company that lobbies the Ontario government. And so I think he's trying to muddy the waters with that, in the sense that, a puck on all your houses. And we've seen some of the questions in the House of Commons this week attacking the NDP leader's brother. We've heard attacks flying on the Liberal side as well. So I think if he's trying to protect himself by making it seem like everybody else is doing this, I think the very strong stance that he has taken against the lobbying community, or we should say certain groups within the lobbying community, like he has named the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, the Canadian Business Council, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Almost makes you wonder, is there a Conservative waiting in the wing to replace these businesses with their own? But it speaks to, I think what he's really saying, is I don't want to take risks, but also it's pretty obvious, everybody in the advocacy movement would know that if you want politicians to respond to something, you will need to make it easy for them, so you need the people to demand it. I don't think that is new. That's just stating the obvious. I think this was an editorial about capital gains, supposed to be, and he never took a position. He basically told business, go out and sell this policy for me, so it can be easier for me to vote against the government's bill, because the people that I'm courting support from, they are all supportive of this, or many of them are. That's what public opinion polls tell us. So there's just so many different messages at play, and I agree with Andrew's point about it was quite something to say, well, these people are in bed with the Liberals, or not. They were not opponents enough of the Liberal government. Get on my side, lobby basically for me, sell my policies, and then I will be responsive.
Okay, Chantal.
I don't disagree about trying to divorce himself from some inside the bubble, I would say, controversies over lobbying. I don't think that most people anywhere in Canada are worrying about Jenny Byrne and her lobbying ties. But I thought the first goal was to get off the hook on the capital gains tax changes. What the Liberals have done is usually these changes would have been part of a larger budget bill that the Conservatives are set to oppose. They've hived it off so that they are meant to force the Conservatives to vote for or against that specific issue. And I don't think Mr. Poilievre wants to fall into the trap of voting for against this change, because it goes against his branding as a commons people defender. So he's kind of using this as a step to say, well, you know, if you can't make the case, why should I make the case for you? But that being said, I don't believe a liberal conservative government will do without lobbyists. And I don't believe that the Conservative Party should stop lobbyists from attending fundraisers.
And there's nothing wrong with that, to be clear.
Hypocrisy. But you're not going to stand at the door and say, were you a lobbyist? And if so, you can't give me money and come to my dinner. They don't invite people to those fundraising dinners in the sense of you come by invitation only. But I also think that the lobbying industry has had a really good ride from the corporate sector, since we've moved to political financing that excludes big business. Why? Because it makes lobbyists more important to all those lobby groups, because they can't anymore say, we're giving you a big check, give us a hearing, which is probably good, but which is, I think, worked wonders for lobbyists.
It means that they have to go to these things and they have to try and talk to people directly. Andrew?
Well, there's a simpler way to put lobbyists out of business, and that's stop giving out special favors of the kind that lobbyists lobby for. So partly it's a policy question, but I agree with Chantal. This is yet another policy question on which conservatives, you would expect the conservatives to be taking a conservative position. So this on capital gains, on top of the ban on replacement workers, on top of subsidies to electric vehicle battery plants. On each of these, Poilievre has basically ducked and not taking any position, but now he's turning it into a virtue. It just shows how tough I am on business, that I'm going to make business make its own case.
I mean, that could be construed as quite brilliant political tactics, Althia.
Well, just to go back to the relationship between, the fundraisers and the lobbyists, I think, maybe it's like a very obvious thing here in the bubble, but a lot of these lobbyists are former partisans. Like they were working for Stephen Harper, and now they went for a GR firm or a public relations firm. And like these are the same people that volunteered during the election to knock on doors and work in the war rooms. So it's basically like you're going to a fundraiser with your friends.
It's grotesque.
But that is the way it works. And I don't know that people outside of this town realize that. The other truth, frankly, is that MPs will continue to go to events. I have been to events this week, and I have seen MPs at events because these are their constituents. And frankly, they want to say hello, and they want to learn about the policy options. And another truth, frankly, is that lobbyists do useful work, because a lot of times the government drafts legislation in a vacuum, and they don't realize the unintended consequences of their actions. And it is lobbyists who work for or were hired to work for a certain group of people that say, oh, wait a second, if you do this, this is the impact on my sector.
If it has unintended consequences for Mr. and Mrs. Canada, they're out of luck. If it has unintended consequences for somebody who can pay $10,000 to a lobbyist, then they get a sympathetic hearing.
But it's legal. But it is legal. Let's be clear.
No.
Chantal, last word. Yes, last word.
But sometimes you do bring knowledge to the table if you're a lobbyist that impacts Mr. or Mrs. Canada. And if you don't listen to any of it, you won't know when. And it's up to the politician listening to make that call, whether this was just self-interest or whether there are really, this will have collateral consequences that will amount to collateral damage.
Public servants are pushing back against a 3-day in-office mandate.
3 days a week is purely political and puts the services Canadians depend on at risk.
But the president of the Treasury Board says even a hybrid deal was never promised.
A hybrid work environment is not within the collective agreements.
So what's to be made of this brewing battle between the public sector employees and the government? What would those tensions mean for the Liberals, particularly over the summer? Let's bring back our panelists, Chantal, Andrew, Althia. Althia, you want to start us off here? I think this is one of these ones that gets Canadians right across the country talking, because a lot of people are obviously back at work 5 days a week. But there is a legitimate conversation, I think, to be had, and the government could be running into some real hot water.
So sometimes you have an incident where it makes it seem like the people in Ottawa are completely disconnected from things happening outside of Ottawa, and this is one of those examples. Many public servants are upset that 3 days a week was not discussed in the context of their strike, and that if that had been at least, if that was the government's intention, it should have made it known back then, and so they're upset about that. I think the union is overplaying its hand, like service is at risk for employees going into work an extra day. I think the city of Ottawa may be overplaying its hand too by saying that the reason that they have asked for this is because of struggling businesses downtown. Downtown does look a bit of like a ghost town, but should that be driving the federal government's decisions? I don't know. What is interesting about this is the pressure that it is putting on the NDP. There is no way that the NDP is going to pull out of the supply and confidence agreement in the next few months because of this one issue. I would be incredibly surprised. We will not have an election because of this one issue. The NDP really wants to make sure that, dental care and that contraception medication and diabetes medication is available to the public so that they can, say that the Conservatives want to threaten to take that away. Right. But it does put the NDP on a bit of a pickle in the sense that the government clearly has thought this through, and Anita Anand is right. She and the government are within their right to determine where employees work. Is there a middle ground? If you ask employees, a lot of them are just annoyed that they have to bring their stuff back home every day because they're hoteling. And maybe if they all had lockers or a designated workspace, they would be happier going 3 days a week. Maybe there is a middle ground. It sounds so trivial. I'm sorry. I feel like
it doesn't. I mean, there's and we should point out there are civil servants who don't work in the National Capital Region, who work in other parts of the country too, and they might have been hired remotely. And the second thing I will say is that I don't think Ottawa is ever jumping downtown, like not before this or
thank
since.
Thank you.
No offense to the town I live in. Yes, Chantal.
So can I take issue with the notion that the government has thought this through? Yes, the government has thought this through, i.e. in making maybe Premier Ford and the Mayor of Ottawa happy. That being said, the Mayor of Ottawa is now saying he would like more people downtown, but he never asked for this. So I guess he realized that the people who elect him are also the people who are unhappy.
Yes. He asked for it publicly.
He just said that. Publicly, I'm just stating a fact here. But when the minister says it's not in the contract, that's not the point. What I want to hear is we have numbers that show us that productivity is down because we are not having civil servants come in 3 days a week. That's the argument I'm interested in. Yeah. I'm not hearing it. Why? Because no one bothered to ask themselves whether in this new era that we are in, there are assets to be had from working remotely, or whether it would really improve services. I also think it was mishandled in the way that it was brought about. We just tell you this is going to happen. I think it's going to hurt the Liberals on two fronts. It's going to hurt the Liberals in an area where Ottawa and the larger area where they tend to do well. Yes. It puts pressure on the NDP and puts them in a really awkward position. And bottom line, if this results in a slowdown in services or a perceived slowdown, people in this cycle of the government's life are going to say, Justin Trudeau mishandled this.
Yeah. Last word to you, Andrew.
You said that a lot of people are back to working 5 days a week. A lot of people never stopped working 5 days a week. And for all those people, I think, are looking at this, as Althia said, with an air of incredulity at the unreality of it all. I have no particular position on whether it should be 2 days or 3 days or 4 days, but I do think it's within the prerogative of management. But I certainly think, for a public sector union, their main weapon in any kind of fight like these is political, is embarrassing the government, making the government look bad. The extravagance of the rhetoric of the public sector unions on this is so out of whack with the actual importance of the issue at hand that I don't think, I'm not sure I agree with Chantal. It may hurt the government in particular pockets, but overall, I think most people are going to look at this and go, get a grip. 3 days a week working in the office is no great hardship.
Okay, Chantal,
until it is perceived as the reason why you're suddenly not getting your passport on time or whatever service. And then in the current public mood, it's going to be the government's fault.